Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. And most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I'm on here today with Dr. Fred Moss, MD. He is the foremost expert on delivering your true voice into the world so that it can heal. Your voice matters. Your voice can heal. Dr. Fred has been actively practicing in the mental health field internationally for over 40 years, and as a psychiatrist has been an unwavering stand for the transformation of prevailing, disempowering conversation that encompasses the industry globally. He is a firm believer that conversation, communication, creativity, and human connection are ultimately at the source of all healing, of all conditions, in all fields. Dr. Fred, thanks for being on today. We had a couple challenges, but here we are.
Here we are. A couple challenges tends to pull people together. It's like being in a foxhole with a new friend.
Here we are in the foxhole then. Dr. Fred, you gave a quick, we had a quick couple pieces of conversation before we got started, and one of the things that we talked about was like we're kind of what you said and what I heard are two different things, I'm sure. So what I heard you say was like we're conduits for creative energy, right? Source energy, and that's really the deal with this podcast, is that you and I are going to have this conversation, and a listener is going to tune in, and they're going to pick up on a message that's being delivered, through source energy, through the all powerful or whatever, through you to them today that can only be delivered right now. What is that message, Dr. Fred?
I think the message is you are not mentally ill. You are a human being. I think that what really got here is that pain, suffering, and discomfort frequently accompanying this particular lifetime does not in any negative or any real way signify any kind of illness or disease. And in fact, all it really signifies is that you are a human being, even in the form of exquisite pain, or even in this source, even if sourced by tremendous loss or fear or anxiety or confusion or aimlessness, any of those things. One thing to really get is that all those experiences are exquisitely human. And if you can get away from believing that there's something wrong with you, if you can get away from believing that you're defective, if you can get away from believing that you're afflicted with a condition that leaves you less than another human being, I really invite our listeners to consider that that might not be the case. And what you might really be is just another one of us, a human being. 7.8 billion of us around here, and there's a good chance that you're one of them.
For sure. And I love that message. And man, I got to imagine that the past couple of years with the influx of COVID really magnified, the thought that they might be sick or ill, whereas like you're saying, they recognize that they're human, right? And there's something they can work towards. I'm just curious, like, how's that been for you to address and see over the past couple of years with COVID?
Well, here's the thing, even with COVID, we're all suffering great fears and great losses and great confusions, turnovers. We're all having, some degree of anxiety about what the next days are going to bring, or what's going to happen next, or where are we going to have to go, or what are we going to have to do, or who are we going to have to be in order to deal with external events. Now, the truth is, it's always been the most difficult of times. It just got a little more difficult. But there was never a time in the history of the world where the people who were living thought, this is not as difficult as it gets. And the truth is, it's always as difficult as it gets, and it gets a little more difficult. It's like part of the ride. So there is a prevailing conversation out there that depression is an illness. Now, let me make this very clear, Brandon. Under no circumstances am I diminishing the impact of being depressed. I'm not telling depressed people, and I'm sure we have some very real depressed people who are listening, that there's anything that they're making up or that it's less painful or that it's in their head. No, 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 no. Quite the contrary. What I'm suggesting is it's extremely real, but it's so real as a human response to the world that we're living in or to the world that you're living with. So it's like blaming a log for burning in a fire. If a log is burning in a fire, one thing you could do is blame the log for being flammable, or you could get that there's a fire out there, and what logs do when they're in a fire is that they burn. And so the idea of being depressed, nervous, anxious, afraid, those kinds of things in the present times, well, frankly, unfortunately, even though they're exquisitely uncomfortable, is just another piece of being a human being.
Yeah, I mean, so since we're on the topic, right, of that, and first of all, I love the response. Like it's always the hardest of times, right? No matter where we are, it's always the toughest of times, and I think once we realize that those are the conditions, we know what we're working with. This is the toughest of times, and this is what we're working with, right? In terms of the people that are depressed right now, how do we get them to, I guess, switch that mind frame from depressed? I punched up the word stutter because it reminds me of a Zig Ziglar quote I heard a while back talking about Navajo Indians or some type of indigenous tribe that said they didn't stutter because they didn't have a word for it, right? So is it because we've got this word for it and we've got a context for it, which is one thought that I've got here. But how do we even just say, all right, look, this is a human condition. What do we do next?
Well, here's the thing. I guess I'm not saying that if you feel depressed, you're not depressed. I am saying if you feel depressed, you are depressed. I get it. It's just not an illness. It's like if you're cold, you're cold. If you're warm, you're warm. If you're, it's like whatever you are, you are. And depression in and of itself is not a pathological condition. Depression is an experience, an emotion. And if in fact one is feeling depressed, it isn't like, oh, what should I do now? I'm depressed. It's, well, maybe the thing to do is just get that you're depressed. Let's say, okay, so I'm feeling depressed today. I'm feeling depressed now, or in the last week, or most of the last week. If my cat gets run over, or my friend gets sick, or I lose my job, or if I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed today, or if it's just overwhelmingly difficult to walk through the world today, all those things might contribute to a sense of depression. And all I'm asking the listeners to do, not to take their legs out from under them and not to assume that because you're feeling something very uncomfortable, that there's something wrong with you. In other words, there's nothing wrong with feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's great. You're human. You're going to experience these things, and it's a natural reaction, natural response to certain conditions, right? And hopefully try and deal with it and don't recognize it as an illness. I think that when we label it as an illness, it's really hard to get rid of it, right?
Exactly.
Which is one of the things that I'm loving right now. It is this transition from things being from it being mental illness into mental health, right? Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear. I mean, you've been in the industry for a little bit now, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How has that shaped what's going on in your space right now? The transition, that language transition.
Right. So different people use different phrases like mental health or mental wealth or, something different than mental illness or mentally ill. And in the world of healthy, you have to be a little bit careful because when you say mental health, and although that's a much more palatable concept than mental illness, what I'm suggesting is, what if there is no such thing inherently as mental illness? that we're always mentally healthy, no matter what we're feeling, even if we're feeling unhealthy. Meaning, just because you feel unhealthy doesn't make you unhealthy. And just because someone else calls you unhealthy doesn't. Now you're like, hey, Fred, I got some people who are not mentally healthy. I really get that. There are some people out there who aren't mentally healthy. What I'm going to suggest is that most of those people have one of a few different things going on. They're either taking in things that are hurting them, toxic items through their mouth or through their veins or through their nose or even through their eyes or their ears. Those things can definitely cause mental derangement or mental instability even more than life does. So that's one way to get mentally unhealthy. And another way to get mentally healthy, you've already referred to, is start calling yourself mentally unhealthy, and by that day, you will be mentally unhealthy. So once you acknowledge yourself as being deficient, once you assume that you're walking around with only half of a person, or with a person who's missing something called mental health, or something called, I don't know, a reuptake, a receptor site, or some sort of neurotransmitter, well then it is precisely at that time when you accept that there's something wrong with you, that at that moment you start living life from there being something wrong with you. And at that point, of course there's something wrong with you because you say so. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I jotted down over here, become the authority on yourself, right? Even if you've got some outside person telling you, like you're saying, telling you that you're not mentally stable, I think that you should be the what I'm hearing you say is kind of like you should be the one that sets that tone, right?
Yeah.
And because again, once you accept that, that's something that you go ahead and carry, and you just you kind of point to it. Well, I'm this way because of XYZ. And always mentally healthy. I always, I think of it in this terms, and I'd love to hear your thought on it. Right, like if I'm sick, if I feel like my body's sick, but mentally, like I feel fine. Right, like there's no bruise on my, mental health. It's just that my body feels sick, and my body's just kind of weighing it down. Is that
okay? So again, it starts being, you're asking great questions, but what this is, look, you can feel really sick. And at that point, when you feel sick, like I can't think, I'm not myself, my thoughts are running ragged, and you can call that illness if you like, or you can call it what it is, which is that you feel sick, that your thoughts aren't running the way you wish. That's all okay. You want to know why? Those are aspects of simply being a human. They're just part of being human. In fact, I contend every single thing that has ever happened to you in your life is part of being human. 100% of everything that has happened to you in your life is part of being human. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to get that.
right? No, I mean we land right on it. We certainly do. Well, I appreciate you, like I said, hopping on here today. I did take read through your book, your Creative 8. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I think that it ties in well. I did literally. It's funny, we talk about synchronicities, right? And this morning I did a quick blurb on recognizing yourself as creative, right? No matter what you're doing, you're creating something, right? You're either doing it internally or externally. And you hit on a couple that I certainly enjoy and recognize as creative, which is when you cook, right? And recognizing that is just kind of like a creative endeavor, and you can find yourself in a really nice state of flow. But I'd love for you to share with the audience who may not be familiar with you a little bit of your Creative 8, and how you decided to throw that out there and make that one of your pieces.
Sure, thank you. So Creative 8. Healing through creativity and self-expression. So what I noticed when people would say, well, what am I supposed to do when I feel lousy? When I feel detached, or when I feel afraid, when I feel anxious, when I feel hopeless, when I feel just generally uncomfortable. What am I supposed to do with that? What can I do that will allow me to again find some sense of satisfaction or joy? And I noticed something that I think we all know, and that is when we're in the action. You just spoke to it in the world of cooking. When they're in the action of creating, and really this might go a little bit more towards your listenership here, because it's starting to butt up against the creator, if you will, the creator. And we start getting that when we act as creators, when we act as, in the image of, then what happens is when we're dancing or singing or art, creating art or cooking or writing, when we're doing some of these things, when we're in the midst of doing art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, and gardening are the 8, those symptoms, which I hesitate to call symptoms, those uncomfortable feelings tend to lift, and we find ourselves in a creative space that is remarkably rewarding to our soul at the very moment, no matter whether we had one of these circumstances going on or not prior to doing it. So the Creative Way 8 points towards 8 things that you can do and be, like in the world of art or music or dancing, etc., that while doing them, you get an opportunity to get relief from whatever your despair is, whatever your discomfort is. I added a couple others, by the way. Photography and cleaning became number 9 and 10. And ultimately, there is an 11th one. And that's the one I use when somehow the other 10 aren't available, which I'm not sure how often that is, because even to make music, if you take 2 sticks and hit a table, that's music, that's fine. And that is helping anyone do anything. So again, in the image of, when we're at maximum service as humans to humans, for whatever reason, helping anyone do anything, the negative symptoms, the negative frequency symptoms do tend to lift during that process. And I invite people to take just a few minutes a day to remind themselves that when they're doing that, there is relief available. And you don't have to stop at the 3 minutes a day. You actually could do it several times a day. You can't overdose on this particular medicine.
Yeah, I love it. And I had a friend of mine who was on the podcast, and he'd mentioned the last one that you had mentioned, whenever his mother was feeling down, or he'd said that they would do acts of kindness, right? They had nothing, and they would go like to other grocery stores and get bread and hand it out to the needy, right? Even though they didn't have anything, but it was a way that they were able to feel good. So I love hearing that as a prescription of sorts. And I love, you're speaking my language, right? When you're saying, when we do this and act in the image of, right? Recognize ourselves as creators in the image of, that's to me what we're here in the image of, not as humans. That's not the image that we're here to portray. We're here to portray the internal and greater spirit and the creativity creators that we are, right? And the other thing you had mentioned, you only need to do it like about a minute a day. This morning, I'd mentioned write out the thought. So just one moment, make it real. Because if it's just in your head, we all have to overcome these hurdles. Like 90% of getting out there and being creative is like, well, what if this sucks? What if nobody likes my cooking? Why should I cook? Right. And that's another thing that you mentioned too, is that, hey, maybe you're classically trained as a pianist. Maybe you're classically trained as a chef, and trying to eliminate, you mentioned a couple things, eliminate like the judgment of your creativity. And then the other one that you'd mentioned in there, which I really enjoy too, is do something you've never done before. To be a creator in a creative space in something brand new, to bring that beginner's mindset. Love to hear how you kind of got into how you made that the formula.
Sure. Well, it takes creativity to do something that you've never done before. And sometimes it's like, if you like playing the same song on the piano, and you get down and you start playing that same song that you've always played, you play chopsticks again and again and again and again, then that's not the same as being creative. That's actually starting to fall into familiar territory. So I know when I pick up a ukulele or a harmonica, or when I pick up even an SLR camera, or if I pick up a paintbrush or, sculpting tools, I'm doing something that I've never done before. And by definition, whatever I do next with that tool will be new, will be different, and will be in the world of creativity. So there's a fresh new understanding that shows up. And along with that, what shows up is I learn at that point that I don't know everything. And that there are some really new spaces that I've never done, because otherwise we walk around quite often thinking that we know everything we need to know to be us. It's true. We know everything we need to know in order to be us. We do. I get it.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that is when we, I guess when we experience these new things that you're talking about, that we begin to understand that there's still quite a bit more to us that we need to find, or there's still more to us to find out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is. There's much more to us to find out. And, I like, my wife likes to dance tango, and I'm not officially a tango dancer, but every so often I'll be like, give it a try, and I'm kind of clumsy. That dance allows for that to some degree, and or she's also a painter. She has she has a whole studio there with brushes of multiple sizes and paints and acrylics of multiple types I don't know the first thing about. And I know that when I take those things on and I begin to really explore what's there for creativity, any of the negative experiences, which I experience, I say quite frequently, in between events, I might fall pretty deep down a rabbit hole. It's a tough world out there. It's a tough world to live in. And feeling bad sometime during the day doesn't mean that I'm sick. It only means that I'm feeling bad. And if I don't want to feel bad anymore, one thing I can do is become a creator. And the easiest way to become a creator is in these, sort of performing and visual arts, of art and music and dancing and singing and drama, and then in the kitchen of cooking, and then writing, and then gardening. And that's, by the way, different than going to a museum or reading a book. These things are not necessarily creative, although you should do them. You should go to a museum frequently, and you should read lots of books. But it's not in the realm of creativity then. That's more in the realm of being receptive of someone else's creativity. And what I'm suggesting is writing and making art is more effective for reducing these uncomfortable experiences than going to a museum or reading a book.
Well, I think it's interesting to hear that you, with all your knowledge and capabilities and vast toolkit, that you still have negative experiences, right? I mean, and again, but I think that's important for anybody to hear. Like even the master, right, as it were, still has these human experiences because you're human, and we need to understand that this impacts everybody. That when you have these and you're feeling bad, you're experiencing humanity. You're experiencing being a human. Now, we talk about recognizing it. Are you talking about like just kind of leaning into like feeling bad, just recognizing it? And would you recommend, hey, don't judge yourself for this? Like, again, recognize yourself as a human. You're feeling bad, so what do you want to do about it? Or where do you take that?
Yeah, so it's all the don'ts out there. They don't work very well. So, when I judge myself, I'm also being a human. So don't judging yourself either. Every experience that you're having is just another example of being a human. So, first of all, to your first point, I actually feel bad frequently. And I could even make a case that when I feel bad, it's as bad as I've ever felt ever in my whole life, and worse. Because I apply, whatever I know about how to not feel bad. And when I break through into helplessness or hopelessness or fear or anxiety or depression or aimlessness or confusion or any kind of weirdness or super misery or pain or disgust or disappointment or grief or lack of energy, all of these negative vibrational experiences. When I go there now, it's deeper and darker and nastier than it's been ever. It's like, dude.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to laugh at that, but I mean, right. So, I mean, why would you say that is? Is it because you know all the things that you know and then like you still find yourself there anyways?
It's part of being human. What I'm saying is, by being human, you get to experience all of human culture. When I allow myself, when I stop pretending that I'm supposed to not feel this way, then what I get is the whole kit and caboodle. The goal in this life might not be to feel great every minute.
Sure.
Can you be with feeling great about feeling terrible?
Absolutely right. Fan of Alan Watts, and I guess he goes. He's got the one line. To know the crest, you got to know the trough. Right.
That's right. Exactly.
So if all we were was like continuously happy or anything, like how would like I don't know where you live currently, but it'd be like driving through the Midwest, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's just flat and like over time you're like there's nothing here to see. There's nothing here to see, right? So by having those highs and the lows, we're gonna have different perspectives and varying perspectives. One thing we talked about, Dr. Fred, was in this journey of yours, I'm assuming you mentioned you've had some spiritual breakthroughs and some spiritual moments. I know that when I experienced what I would have called, when I'd still call it like an awakening experience, there was a question in my mind for a moment, like am I losing my mind, right? So I guess, where does that fall in the human experience? These, supposed spiritual awakenings or breakthrough moments. What does that look like in the professional field, and in your experience?
So, can you pose the question one more time exactly?
Like spiritual awakenings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where does that fall in your professional field? A, and B, have you experienced any yourself? Like
Sure.
Again. For me, when I experienced it, I was like, oh shit, I'm losing my mind. Right. But I was able again to personally look at my history and apply it in different areas, then losing my mind and fell forward into it. Hence, here we are having this conversation.
Yeah. So spiritual awakenings, it's hard to really point a finger on it because they don't lend themselves to three-dimensional language. They don't lend themselves to linear language. So trying to put language to these things after they occur is a difficult task. It's not real. It doesn't lend itself to being described. So part of it is you almost wake up on the other side of one and go, it's sort of like an earthquake. You wake up on the other side. It's like, oh, that was a spiritual awakening. It's not something to plan for. It's not something you ever had experience with before you have one. And even when you have one, it isn't like been there, done that, I will recognize my next spiritual experience or my spiritual awakening. And no, not at all. Your next spiritual awakening is coming at you. And when you experience it, you won't have words or description that's ready. So in some ways, I think what happens is there's an understanding during that time of eternity or of divinity, of providence, of something greater than me that is running the show, something greater than me that has it be that I was headed in a certain direction and then X and Y occurred either internally or externally, and now I'm headed in a different direction as a direct result of that experience. And the only way I can understand that experience doesn't fall in some sort of reality or rational thinking that preceded it, but it does fall in some sort of magic that was outside of the realm of imaginable, and that then gets categorized as a spiritual experience, which then, sends my life careening in another direction.
So, to your point, right? Everything that you mentioned, it's so that's what was true for me. In that experience, I was like, I don't know, didn't know what it was, going through it. Had to reach out to multiple people who I thought like I could at least express myself to. One was, a Buddhist monk, and another one was, a couple people that were in the space, spirituality space. And when I tried to describe it again to my wife last night, words simply I can't form the words to make it happen, right? To share that experience with her. And there was no way that I saw it coming. Right now, I don't know what the next ones are going to look like, or anything. I have no idea. Right? Barely. I'm still bowled over by the last one that happened like four years ago. Right, and chasing that over. So, for the listener that goes through this experience or comes to you, what do you tell them?
You might be surprised that it's the same answer. It's welcome to humanity. You get to have those things happen, and you get to have everything happen. This is a temporary existence down here on Earth. And that's undeniable. It's frankly the only undeniable thing of this life is that it will end on Earth anyways. So in this closed-ended experience, you're going to have experiences that get described as A, B, C, D, E, spiritual experience or depression or everything in between. And I invite our listeners, when that is overwhelming as well, when your spiritual experience takes you aside and has you just like tumble into the unknown, that's just another example of being able to take on welcome to humanity as a way of dealing with it. Like, wow, is this something being human? And in some ways, if there's room to show gratitude or thanks, that might be a good space to show it.
Yeah, I love that. And again, without the language, without like a background in it, that's sometimes where I land myself. I'm like, are we just, as Alan Watts call it peopling, right? The earth is like peopling. So we blossom in our own time, or we people at a certain point, and this is just part of that experience. So exactly. I appreciate that. Haven't really had the opportunity to talk to anybody on a professional level about it. So it's really great that you're on here to just kind of to have this conversation. What is like one question, I guess, in this space that you wish somebody would ask you that hasn't yet?
Wow.
Or, Dr. Fred, what should we be talking about that we're not?
Yeah. I think what we should be talking about is that the biggest crisis in the world right now is not what we think it is. We think the biggest crisis might be, I don't know, some of us think climate change. Other of us think racism. Some think it's sex trafficking. Others think it's the virus. Other people think it's, divisiveness or corruption or censorship, and it's getting close when I say censorship. You see, the biggest crisis in the world today is that we are giving up on our own voices. We are having our voices removed from us, either by us or by the world around us. There's a new level of constriction and contraction and restriction that has us no longer honoring our own authentic voice. So we're actually speaking in what we think are safe ways in order to protect ourselves, in order to survive, and at the cost of sacrificing our own authentic message. So what we should be talking about is whatever it is that is our authentic message. We are here for a short time. What a shame to get through this life and never actually deliver your authentic message to anyone while you are here. To me, that is the greatest crisis and the greatest tragedy on the planet at this very moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's super powerful, right? And I think that it goes back to the point of, how do we are you a fan of Hawkins?
Sure.
Is David Hawkins, and he talks about his consciousness schedule, right? Or his consciousness bit. How do we get people to that 200 scale, right? Which is courage. How do we get people to take a step into themselves and have the courage? And in my mind, I think of courage as strength and love combined, right? For themselves to begin to speak, not in safe ways, but to speak in ways that are ultimately in alignment with the truth of who they are.
Mm-hmm. There's some level of urgency that's with us now. I think if we look in the mirror in the morning or any day, I think we can no longer be honest with ourselves that everything's going to be okay and we know it. Now, the truth is everything is going to be okay and we do know it. But we don't know what's going to happen next week, next month, next year. And we don't know that our voice is going to become somehow more available to us. I think all of us know that it's possible that our voice is going to become less available to us. So there comes a point where one just has to own their ground and say what's so right now. The amount of relief and the amount of power and the amount of contribution that one gives to the world when they speak their truth, no matter what it is quite considerable. And once I speak my truth, like I'm attempting to do now, my truth is about sourcing people finding their truth. Once I speak my truth, I feel like I can open the gates for other people to speak their truth, and that's contagious. That's what contagion looks like. No masks necessary for that one.
Right, and I love it. So when you share this message and you're, maybe you're having coffee at a coffee shop, talking to a friend, sharing this message, and they say, Dr. Fred or Fred, how do I do that? Like, what do you recommend to somebody to just get started on that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to really come to grips with you're probably not speaking your true voice, and it's okay. Again, no reason to rip a hole in yourself because you're not speaking your true voice. You're not speaking your true voice. You're just saying what the boss wants you to say. You're just saying what your wife or your husband wants you to say. You're just saying what the community wants you to say, what your friends want you to say. You're just saying what it is just to stay solid so you can somehow make it back into your house at night and go to sleep. All right. Cool. It's fine. Now, does that life look like one you want to keep living? And when you start asking yourself that question, you start taking baby steps. You start saying things that are a little more consistent with what you want to say. And that doesn't necessarily mean screaming at the clouds or telling your boss to shove it or telling your wife you're leaving. That's not necessarily what I'm speaking to. What I'm speaking to is you might be able to tell these people what's really going on for you in areas where when you communicate it, the other person receives it and in such a way are altered by your truth. Like, oh my God, this is a person. This is another human being speaking their truth. And that, like I said, has a very attractive magnetic value to it. When we speak our truth, we can even speak easier with people who disagree with us or people who are, entirely opposed to what we're saying, diametrically opposed. And we still can be with those people if they're speaking their truth and we're speaking ours. That's where you really can learn. Listen to the people you don't agree with as if you care about what they have to say. That's another good space to learn how to speak your truth.
I think that's fantastic. I agree. I am personally feeling some sense of urgency, right? There's a pressure to express, right? And to get that actual message out there. So I really appreciate you sharing that and some different ways to approach it. And to identify the whole fact that, what we say is enough to keep us safe, right? How much? I don't know why Alan Watts is all over my head right now today, but I think he mentions I'd rather live like a good life that I enjoyed, a short one that I enjoyed, rather than a long one that was painful, right? By not be ever expressing the truth of who I am, right. Another thing that I feel like I recognized over this past couple of years of the pandemic was that nobody was spared, right? right, through this pressure and this need and looking for a place to vent, and nobody was spared from ultimately being human, right? Everybody was going through the same thing at the same time, and so I think that was an opportunity for us all to bond and have some of those honest conversations. And to your point, when we can have these honest conversations, I know that I had one with my supervisor in one of my roles, and I let him know. I said, "Hey, I got some things going on at home right now, and if I seem like I'm a little distracted, I am, right? I got some things going on." And he's like, "All right, well, thanks for letting me know. Everything's going to be all right." But I felt so relieved,
sure,
empowered, that I was just able to share that, right? And I didn't, there was no repercussion for being authentic, for sharing the truth of what's going on, for sharing my humanity.
Right, exactly. Beautiful. I'm glad you did that.
Yeah.
It's super great. Good example.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. And again, thanks for bringing that up. So I'm at the point now where I ask a couple different questions if we're good to move on, right, from where we're at.
Sure, we are. I have about five minutes or so. Does that work for you? Yeah.
Yep, sure does. So I'll just I'll give us one. This is a kind of the point in the show where I like to call it spiritual speed dating, right?
Okay.
Dr. Fred, like somebody's gonna tune in and hear you. They're looking for the next spiritual date.
Boom.
Man, what's the greatest quality humans possess?
The greatest quality that humans possess is the capacity to listen and learn.
Okay. What is it that you feel prevents people from living their full potential? I think we hit on a little bit, but if you want to explain a little bit more.
We are programmed for survival, and we think that by not living our true potential, we are being safer, when in fact, not living to your true potential in no way gives you a safer life.
Amen. Well, look, Dr. Fred, thanks for being on today. Thanks for working through the technical kinks as we got this thing going. Where should I send people to find out more about what you have to offer?
Well, there's a couple places. Number one, I have a website that's going through a revision. That's welcometohumanity.net. And if you really want to, take on this community of finding your true voice, that's where I'm really spending most of my time. I would tune into the True Voice community on Facebook. That's a group that's building up now, and it's really an opportunity to grow with people who are really interested in authentic messages, no matter what they are in content. It's a beautiful group of people who are really interested in saying what they mean, meaning what they say, and learning how to listen to others. So the True Voice community, as well as you can ding me on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Those are the two places that I spend any time in social media. And then, of course, I have my own podcast, the Welcome to Humanity podcast, that I invite people to listen to. And I got some pretty good conversations. Maybe I'll have you on shortly. I think that would be fun.
I'd love it. Dr. Fred, thanks so much for being on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brandon. It's been great.
Got it.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.